The gospel on the first Sunday of Lent is always, every year, an account of Jesus being tempted in the desert. This is not by accident of repetition, it's by design. The church is inviting us to confront the reality of temptation in our lives. So we might begin by asking, what's temptation? Temptation is an inclination, an urge, or a desire to have or do or say something that's bad, wrong, harmful, unwise. Temptation is flirting with something I know isn't good. Not good for me, not good for my neighbor. When I'm tempted, I often respond in a variety of different ways. I tease out the possibilities the temptation appears to offer. I allow myself to imagine what it would be like to fall for this temptation. I dream or I fantasize what pleasure or ease, what comfort or delight might be mine if I follow temptation's path. In my mind's eye, I look at what tempts me and I try it on for size, see how it feels. I consider my present burdens and problems and I imagine, the relief that giving into temptation might provide for me. I allow that imagined relief to loom larger and grander than any other solution to the difficulties I'm facing. I begin to picture what the temptation promises me as a haven from my problems, a cozy place, a getaway, an escape from what troubles me. And finally, I convince myself that the temptation I'm facing not only might not be wrong, it might actually be a good thing. And it's certainly something I need, something I want, and you know what? I think I deserve it. Do I sound like somebody who's too familiar with temptation? I know it pretty well because I'm tempted all the time. I'm also someone who falls into temptation. Fortunately, I can say not all the time, but sometimes. Temptation is a con job. And there are two con artists at work here. First, there's the evil one, called the devil in the gospel tonight. Some people call the evil one the devil, Satan, Lucifer. Some will argue that no such individual actually exists. One thing I'm sure of is that evil, however we name it, evil delights in our arguing over whether or not there's a devil, precisely because such arguments so easily and quickly distract us from evil at work in our lives. However, or whether or not you personify evil, I think you will all agree that there's something afoot in the world, something tempting basically good people to do things that basically good people wouldn't otherwise do, things that are basically bad. I know, even when I'm sure of the right thing to do, the good thing to do, the kind and loving thing to do, the moral thing to do, the trustworthy and honest thing to do, even when I'm sure of all of that, even then I'm tempted to do what's wrong, bad, mean, unfaithful, and dishonest. I'm tempted to do the very things that my better self doesn't want to do at all. tempted to do the things that I know better about. And sometimes, even often, I give in to that temptation. I sin. Whoever or whatever power it is in my mind and heart that tempts me to do what offends God and hurts me and my neighbor, I know that power is strong and it's subtle. It's devious, cunning, and real. This power of evil is one con artist in the business of temptation. The second con is me. I do such a good job at convincing myself that what I know is wrong, it's not really all that bad. Might even be good in some way. Besides, whatever the temptation might be, it's pleasing to consider. It's desirable. And hey, I think in the long run, it might even help me. Strong, subtle, devious, cunning, and real. Something as real as a piece of fruit, maybe an apple, hanging from the branch of a tree within arm's reach in the middle of an ancient garden, where all the temptation and sin business began. The design of hearing this gospel every year on the first Sunday of Lent is to help us to name and confront what tempts us and to examine how we respond to temptation in our lives. I thought of maybe at this point kind of listing various temptations, but I don't know what yours are. And I don't want you to know what mine are. And we all have different temptations. So just take a quick second here. When I say temptation, what comes to your mind? In the story we just heard, Jesus had just fasted for 40 days and 40 nights out in the desert. He was in a very weakened physical condition. And in that shape, he went one-on-one, mano a mano, with the devil. But still, he overcame each temptation he met. Our track record is seldom as good as the Lord's is. In fact, it's never as good as the Lord's is. We give in to temptation and we sin. Lent is a time to acknowledge, first of all, that I am subject to temptations. Doesn't matter if I'm 8 years old or 88 years old. I'm subject to temptations and I often fall. Lent's a time to remember that regardless of how I might name evil, the tempter in my life and the tempter in your life is often, in fact, usually stronger, more subtle, more devious, and more cunning than you and me. So Lent is a good time to be sure that in the battle between good and evil in my life and in yours, Lent's a time to be sure that we are on the Lord's side, in the Lord's corner, in the winner's corner. That's the place to be. Don't even think about going out into the middle of the ring and taking on the devil. You will lose, I will lose. Jesus has already won the fight. We just need to stay in his corner. Lent's a time then to look within and to take some personal inventory. A time to examine our conscience, come to know our sins, and to ask the Lord, who overcame all temptation, to ask him for his grace and his strength when we are being tempted, and for his mercy and forgiveness when we fail. Out of just such mercy did the Lord offer himself for us on the cross. The very mercy that he shares with us in the bread and cup of the Eucharist at this table tonight. Pray with me that this Lent will be a time for all of us to name and confront our temptations and our sins and to acknowledge our need. I'll even say our desperate need for the gift of God's mercy and his pardon of our sins.